What remains when even the homes of those who created financial America disappear? Where to look for the trace of a man who ruled Wall Street but lost his own walls? On the corner of Madison Avenue and 37th Street once stood a house, before which even the noisy New York crowd would pause. Not a palace, but a stone bastion of power, the mansion of John Pierpont Morgan, Jr. Now it is gone. No trace of marble staircases, no vault of a winter garden, no fire in the fireplace where an entire tree burned through the evening. Today, the cold facade line of the Morgan Library stands here, the last reminder of the clan that controlled the very bloodstream of American capital. The history of this house is a story of ambition, inherited along with a debt to his father. Jack Morgan, as his contemporaries called him, was born not in luxury, but in the shadow of a giant. His father, John Pierpont Morgan Sr., by the time of his son's birth, already controlled railroads, banks, steel, and even politics. But in Jack's childhood, the family home on Madison Avenue looked more like a fortress than a family nest. Behind heavy oak doors lay offices where the fates of corporations were decided. And in the living room, the voices of Carnegie, Vanderbilt, and Roosevelt resonated. The child learned silence and distance earlier than playing the piano. What more, it seemed, could an heir desire? But this was precisely the paradox. His father created an empire that subjugated America. The son inherited the necessity to justify it. When, in 1904, Pierpont gave Jack the house on the corner of Madison Avenue, it was not merely an act of paternal generosity. It was a challenge, a transfer not of property, but of a mission to keep the Morgan name in history, but without his personal presence. The mansion that stood here had belonged to the Phelps family since the mid-19th century, and only later came into the possession of the Morgans. Its walls witnessed New York's transition from gaslight to electric, from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles. Inside there were 45 rooms and 12 bathrooms, an entire city under one roof. But behind these numbers lay not a desire for luxury, but a fear of loss. Jack Morgan did not build new palaces. He carefully restored old ones, as if fearing that with the new, the past would disappear. The paradox of this house is evident already in its architecture. Outside, a restrained brownstone inherited from Victorian austerity. Inside, gold, silk, marble, mirrors from Paris. The contrast between the facade and the interior reflected the owner himself, a man of banking intellect and deep inner sentimentality. In the evenings, he would sit by the window overlooking the garden, laid out in place of the neighboring house, which his father had demolished, and gaze for a long time at the flickering lights. No one knew that it was in this garden that he first uttered the phrase, later recorded by his secretary, "We manage money, but we do not own time." While the city raised skyscrapers upwards, Morgan Jr. arranged his own skyscraper inwards, a house where each room lifted him higher and higher above the street noise. But time proved stronger than stone. When decades later, Wall Street began to change, this house became a symbol of what cannot be saved from the speed of capital: peace, quiet, and the memory of human measure in a world of numbers. No one knew that soon a second, far more grandiose residence, the country estate Matinecock Point, would repeat the same fate. Its walls would rise, only to then disappear, as if on all maps they were erased by the same hand that once signed banking contracts. Thus begins the story of the house built by the most influential financier of his time, and which Wall Street itself erased from the face of the earth. To understand why John Pierpont Morgan Jr. built his homes like fortresses, one must return to where walls were laid not of stone, but of principles. His lineage began not with gold, but with Puritan strictness. His great-grandfather, Joseph Morgan, was a farmer from Connecticut, a man of labor, not luxury. The family believed that wealth was not a right, but a responsibility. It was in this old new faith that John Pierpont Sr., the future creator of a financial empire, grew up. Pierpont Sr. was not just a banker. He was an architect of trust. In the 19th century, as America built railroads and corporations, he created bridges between capitals, holding them together by word of honor and personal reputation. His philosophy came down to one point: the state can collapse if trust collapses. For him, a bank was a temple of order, and a home, a reflection of that temple. Therefore, the mansion on Madison Avenue was not just a dwelling. It was a manifesto. Wealth as a form of debt to society. Jack Morgan inherited not so much millions as his father's shadow. He received power, but along with it, the fear of squandering the trust that Pierpont Sr. had forged for decades. His own life became an attempt to reconcile two worlds: the world of old money, where honor stood above profit, and the new age of machines, advertising, and speculation. Jack received his education at Harvard, then attended banking school in London, where he adopted British restraint, an almost aristocratic demeanor. He wore gray suits, spoke softly, avoided publicity. All this was a shield against the hustle and bustle of new America. But within this shield hid a man with a keen sense of responsibility and hidden anxiety. One trait distinguished him: he could not stand ostentatious wealth. Even his watch was without engraving. When he took over J.P. Morgan & Co., he encountered a new era, an age of stock market speculation and loss of ethics. The world demanded quick decisions, while Jack believed in slow, measured steps. This internal conflict became his first true enemy. He inherited an imperial machine, but did not want to be its face. His father acted like a monarch, he like a steward of conscience. Paradoxically, it was restraint that made him stronger. During the financial crisis of 1907, when markets collapsed, Jack did not rush into speculation, but opened credit lines for competitors, saving not only them, but also the reputation of his own name. This was his first strategy for success: to protect others in order to preserve himself. He acted as his father had taught, through order, not through risk. But the moral legacy also had a downside. Where others saw enjoyment in wealth, he saw obligation. His luxury was deliberate, almost ascetic. In the house on Madison Avenue, there was no superfluous glitter. Gold merely emphasized structure, not luxury. Even the garden, laid out on the site of the demolished house, was designed not for beauty, but for tranquility. A place where the noise of Wall Street could be hidden behind a green wall. Within these walls, his philosophy was reflected. Every stone, an obligation; every room, a remembrance of duty. He did not believe in the demonstration of power. He believed in its silence. And yet, the stronger the walls became, the deeper grew the feeling of internal emptiness. Jack Morgan built houses, but it seems he was trying to build himself within boundaries that would one day become his prison. It was then that fate would lead him to an encounter that would change not only his personal life, but also the architectural destiny of the clan. In this encounter, two worlds would merge, the old Puritan and the new industrial. And from this union, a mansion would rise, which would become the loudest and most fragile symbol of the Morgan family's power. When Jack Morgan married Jane Norton Grew, daughter of an industrial magnate from Buffalo, the event passed quietly, without newspaper headlines or balls. But it was precisely this union that became a strategic bridge between old banking dynasties and new industrial America. Jane brought into the home not only a dowry, but also another breath of the era, soft, bright, almost domestic. Where Jack thought in terms of duty, she saw in wealth a space for living. With their marriage, a new chapter began, a fusion of reason and emotion, shrewdness and comfort. Jane adored art and architecture, and it was under her influence that the mansion on Madison Avenue truly came alive for the first time. She commissioned architect Robertson for the interior redesign. Marble from Italy, stucco from Paris, tapestries from Flanders. But in this luxury there was no ostentatious wealth. Every element spoke of taste, not of power. The house became a reflection of the union of two worlds, Puritan duty and feminine sensibility. Rooms appeared that had not existed before in the Morgan world. A winter garden, a music salon, a library with soft light instead of formal lamps. Even Jack's study now resembled not a fortress, but a place of contemplation. In it stood a massive oak table, on which lay drawings for a future project, a country estate on Long Island. Jack dreamed of a home where he could breathe without the roar of Wall Street. The idea belonged to him, but Jane became the inspiration. Thus was born the plan for Matinecock Point, a grandiose estate on the coast, where Morgan wanted to embody the philosophy of tranquil wealth. Here he sought to build not just a house, but a world where time would flow slowly, where each day would have the taste of morning. Architect Christopher Lafarge, known for his ecclesiastical projects, was to combine the strength of stone and the lightness of air. The result exceeded expectations. 57 rooms, 18 bathrooms, enormous halls and galleries through which the ocean breeze freely passed. When Jack first entered the completed house in the summer of 1913, he uttered a phrase that the manager would later record. "Here, one can hear silence breathe." This was the moment when two worlds truly united, the world of capital and the world of contemplation. Outwardly, it seemed like another victory for Wall Street, but deep down, like a rare reconciliation of a man with himself. The union of Jack and Jane became a symbol of restrained harmony for society, an example of how one could be wealthy without being boisterous. But behind this silence, the first rustle of impending anxiety was already stirring. The history of the Morgans was only beginning its journey from architecture to tragedy, from stone to fragility. Matinecock Point became the pinnacle of tranquility, but also the beginning of a silence from which there was no escape. Everything in this house breathed self-sufficiency, from the massive fireplaces to the balustrades, where even the wind sounded muffled, as if it dared not disturb the order. Jack Morgan spent more and more time here. It seemed to him that away from Wall Street, one could stop the relentless march of time, prevent the era from disintegrating. But this very desire turned into his main deception. The First World War broke the accustomed rhythm. America, hitherto self-assured, suddenly found itself drawn into chaos. And it was Jack Morgan who financed the Allies, providing credits to England and France. His name once again became a symbol of power, but now not the kind that builds, but the kind that supplies cannons and ships. Each contract brought millions and thousands of lives that could not be brought back. Newspapers called him the man who feeds the war, and demonstrations took place beneath his windows. He rarely responded publicly. Only once did he tell a journalist, "If I could, I would finance peace." But peace was not within his power. With each passing year, the mansion on Long Island grew emptier. Jane devoted herself to charity, setting up hospitals and shelters, while Jack increasingly left for the city, not out of a desire to work, but to hide from his own tranquility. After the war, a new storm arrived, the 20s. New York became a city of speed, jazz, stock exchanges, automobiles. And Morgan remained a man of the 19th century, caught in a new era. His firm still held the market, but internally he was already losing, not to competitors, but to time. He no longer believed that wealth could retain meaning. In the evenings, he sat in the library at Matinecock Point, lit a single candle, and read his father's letters, in which he wrote, "Strength is confidence in tomorrow." Jack understood that he no longer possessed this confidence. In '29, when the market collapsed, He was warned. He remained silent. For him, the crisis was not a catastrophe, but merely the completion of the inevitable. The market didn't collapse yesterday, he told his assistant. It was collapsing all along. We just didn't notice. He secluded himself in the house, refused interviews, and stopped appearing at receptions. For the first time, the walls that were meant to protect became a boundary between him and the world. Matinecock Point transformed into a phantom, dwelling among the living. Jane died before him, quietly, almost imperceptibly. After her death, the house became utterly empty. Jack wandered through the halls where music once played and heard only echoes. His sons had left, the servants grew old, the garden became overgrown. Only the sea remained unchanged and reminded him of time that cannot be stopped. He died in 43 in one of the small rooms where he once wrote letters to partners. His body was sent to New York, and the house remained standing over the bay like a vast stone pause. Several years later, the building was sold, then abandoned and eventually demolished. Where the Morgan Mansion once stood, there is now a green field, and the wind still blows from the ocean. No plaque, no memory, as if the house, which was the embodiment of power, had never existed. Wall Street, which Morgan had once saved, erased the trace of his life. And yet, if one walks along the shore on a foggy morning, it seems that in the distance, the silhouette of a tower can be seen, and from there comes the faint sound of clocks, the last ones still ticking in the rhythm of the 19th century. When Jack Morgan passed away, the house still stood, enormous, solitary, with windows behind which no light burned. But the real tragedy began not with his death, but with the fact that no one wanted to save this house. His children did not share their father's sentiment for the place. They lived in a different time, in an era of skyscrapers, telephones, fast travel. For them, Matinecock Point was not a legacy, but a burden. In the 50s, the tax on maintaining the estate became unbearable. Thousands of acres of land, marble terraces, a private power station, all this required dozens of workers. One of the last managers recalled that by the end of the decade, only 2 elderly maids lived in the house, ensuring the roof did not collapse. In the halls where orchestras once played, buckets now stood to collect rainwater. Morgan's children tried to sell the mansion, but no one wanted to buy a reminder of the past. Too expensive, too large, too alien to the new era. One newspaper wrote, "The luxury of the 19th century can no longer exist in the economy of the 20th. Thus the house, created as a symbol of eternity, found itself outside of history. This tragedy was not material, but moral. The house, built on the idea of preservation, became an example of the impossibility of preserving. The family whose name determined the fates of nations could not even hold on to its own walls. Jack Morgan strived for order and control, but the world he built itself rejected these principles. When the mansion was finally demolished in 63, no one from the family was present. Workers dismantled the towers and columns as if they were parts of a long-dead organism. One eyewitness, a local photographer, later said, "When the dust settled, it seemed as if a piece of cloud had disappeared from the sky." This story is not about the destruction of a building, but about the loss of meaning. Morgan believed that strength was order, but strength proved to be the ability to change. His house could not do that. Every detail, every stone was created for eternity, and this very fact made it vulnerable. Morgan's moral conflict lies in the fact that he was a man capable of building an empire, but incapable of letting go of the past. He saved the American economy, but failed to save his own legacy. His wealth became a monument to a time when success was measured not by meaning, but by scale. And yet there is something human in this loss. Morgan's greatness did not disappear with the house, it merely changed form. His name lives on in libraries, museums, and foundations where money, once serving power, now serves knowledge. But if one listens deeper to this story, beyond all the numbers, foundations, and names, another sound is heard. A longing for a home that was meant to be a sanctuary, but became a shadow of ambition. A house where the walls remembered footsteps, but could not hold a soul. And perhaps it is precisely in this that its truest tragedy lies. When bulldozers destroyed the walls of Matinecock Point, America was already entering a new era. Skyscrapers of glass and steel rose across the country, symbols of business speed and transparency, the antithesis of the heavy stone confidence embodied by the Morgan House. What was once considered the pinnacle of taste and power now appeared a relic. But along with the disappearance of the mansion, another, less noticeable internal transformation of the family's legacy began. Jack left no direct instructions regarding the fate of his money, but his upbringing, respect for knowledge and art, found continuation in the activities of his daughter, Anne Morgan. Even during her father's lifetime, she saw how luxury could strip a person of meaning and decided differently. Instead of building new palaces, she created charitable organizations that helped refugees and women after the war. Her name is rarely mentioned alongside Wall Street, but it was she who gave the family name a new meaning. After the mansion's destruction, a significant portion of the land came under the management of Nassau County, and later under protection as a nature preserve. Where marble terraces once stood, wild forest now grows, and the air is filled with the scent of salt and pines. This was not preservation in the direct sense, rather a symbolic return to nature, as if the earth itself decided to reclaim its own. The firm J.P. Morgan & Co. also changed. After mergers, crises, and reorganizations, it transformed into a modern giant, but without the family's voice. In the mid-20th century, as banks became corporations and decisions were made by committees, the spirit of personal responsibility vanished. The world where one man could save the financial system passed into history. And yet, there is a certain justice in this disappearance. The Morgans wanted control. They got unpredictability. They built for eternity. They found oblivion. But paradoxically, it is precisely this that made their story eternal. For in the end, the family's strength was manifested not in the preservation of stone, but in the preservation of meaning, serving society, knowledge, culture. In New York on Fifth Avenue stands the Pierpont Morgan Library, more modest than his mansion, but far more enduring. Here, the footsteps of servants and the clinking of glasses are not heard, but every day hundreds of people come to touch upon the idea for which Morgan perhaps lived, to connect money and knowledge, matter and spirit. Thus, the tragedy of the house transformed into a metaphor for the country. America, like Jack Morgan, had to lose its palaces to learn to build not upwards, but inwards, towards meaning. And although the stone walls on Long Island have long disappeared, the idea they carried continues to live. Power passes, but knowledge remains. Today, the place where Matinecock Point once stood seems serene. A gentle slope, pine crowns, the glimmer of the bay in the morning mist. Nothing recalls the marble, gold, or staircases climbed by world-renowned guests. But if one stops and listens, one feels a strange presence. Not a ghost, but an echo of an era when faith in eternity was stronger than fear of time. Morgan's house disappeared, but not its meaning. Historians often say that the mansion on Long Island symbolized the transition from old America to new. Its destruction became a metaphor for the end of the Gilded Age, an era where wealth was considered proof of virtue and beauty was measured by size. Wall Street, which erased the mansion of its chief patron, seemed to acknowledge the world built on the personal will of one man was no longer needed. Now, instead of family homes, there remained banks, funds, exchanges, faceless, yet stable. And yet the paradox is that Morgan's idea triumphed in another form. He wanted to connect capital and culture, and he achieved it. His library became a temple of knowledge, visited by students, historians, researchers. Its halls house the Gutenberg Bible, letters from Catherine the Great, Mozart's scores, things worth building for. Not walls, but meaning. Not power, but enlightenment. This is the philosophical culmination of the entire story. A man who began with money ended his life in a world of ideas. His house fell, but his thinking outlived the architecture. Unlike other magnates of that era, Morgan left not just a foundation or a museum. He left a habit of seeing value in knowledge. And this makes his legacy surprisingly modern. Today, in the 21st century, when skyscrapers have become even taller and wealth even colder, Morgan's story sounds like a warning. Any grandeur built for control is destined to disappear. Only that which is turned towards the future survives destruction. The house on Long Island disappeared because it was confined to the past. The library survived because it is open to all. This is the main lesson. Luxury immured in stone dies with its owner. Generosity invested in culture lives forever. Thus ended the story of the house that Wall Street erased, but began the story of a legacy that Wall Street itself can no longer destroy. One can recall Fitzgerald and his Gatsby, also a dreamer striving to build a paradise out of illusions. But if Gatsby died in solitude, misunderstood by society, Morgan left behind a meaning that society finally understood. The power of money is not in possession, but in creation. And perhaps if one day someone walks along the shore of Matinecock Point again and hears the sound of the wind, it will seem to them that it is not merely the sound of the sea. It is the breath of time, which reminds us, everything we build for eternity lives not in stone, but in memory.